Welcome to Trauma Demystified, a podcast brought to you by Bright Horizon Therapies. I am Natalie Jovanic, and I will be your host as we explore the world of polyvagal theory and its relationship with trauma. Throughout today's episode, we will delve deep into the complexities of polyvagal theory, shedding light on its role in our nervous system's response to various situations. While it simplifies the complicated processes that happen in our bodies, the theory provides invaluable insight into understanding trauma and the responses of the nervous system. Our exploration will not only cover the influence of polyvagal theory on trauma, but also focus on the journey towards trauma recovery. Furthermore, I will provide you with practical tools to maneuver through the different states of your nervous system effectively. So stay tuned to uncover the essential elements for recovering from trauma. How did I find out about polyvagal theory? I became aware of polyvagal theory when I participated in a training on attachment and dissociation. I was curious and I wanted to learn more. Therefore, I attended a training about polyvagal theory by Deb Dana because her name had been mentioned in previous trainings and she wrote various books about polyvagal theory and how to apply it in counseling. When she guided the group through different experiments, it finally made a click in my brain. I suddenly understood the various responses of my nervous system after I had experienced systemic trauma. At this stage, I frequently had a freeze response when attending large group gatherings. I couldn't fully understand why my nervous system responded this way. However, when I was in the training on polyvagal theory, I understood that being part of groups was a cue of danger for my autonomic nervous system after an experience of systemic trauma. This understanding helped me immensely in my recovery. It wasn't anymore an unexplainable symptoms, but I could control how I wanted to respond to it. I found tools to manage my nervous system's responses, and I also worked on my own boundaries to protect myself better in large group settings. What is polyvagal theory? Dr. Stephen Porges developed the polyvagal theory, and it is a framework that helps us understand how our autonomic nervous system regulates its responses to stress and safety. In this theory, the vagus nerve, one of the major nerves in the autonomic nervous system, plays a crucial role in our emotional and physiological states. To give you some background information, the autonomic nervous system manages vital internal organs and glands that we need for daily living. So, for example, it controls the heart, it controls the lungs, and it controls the digestive system. These processes happen automatically and they are outside of our conscious control. And this means we don't have to think about them and they happen anyway. The autonomic nervous system is split into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic part. The sympathetic part manages the fight and flight response, while the parasympathetic part controls our rest and digest functions. So how does the vagus nerve relate to this? The vagus nerve is one of our body's primary nerves. It starts at the back of our skulls at a place that is called medulla oblongata, and it runs through our bodies. It is split into the dorsal vagus and the ventral vagus part. In dorsal vagus theory, the dorsal vagus is connected with the system of immobilization, which is the freeze response and the fawn response. Ventral vagus activation is linked to the system of safety and connection and social engagement. Polyvagal theory has three key principles, which is neuroception, co-regulation, and hierarchy. Let's first look at neuroception. Neuroception is the process by which our autonomic nervous system constantly scans for cues of safety, danger, and life threat. This happens automatically and it's outside of our conscious awareness. So our autonomic nervous system listens to these cues in our environment, our relationships, and within our bodies. So for instance, while I record this podcast, my autonomic nervous system scans for these cues. If I were to hear a fire alarm, it would be a cue of danger, and my autonomic nervous system would shift into a protective state and prompting me to take action. Similarly, as you listen to this podcast, your autonomic nervous system is also in the lookout for cues of safety or threat. If it perceives a cue of danger, it would respond accordingly. So here are some practical examples. If I walk down the street and witness two people aggressively yelling at each other, it might be a cue of danger for my autonomic nervous system, and I'm likely to experience a fight or flight response. If I work with a client who has experienced trauma due to emotional abuse, and I use a word that the abuser has used, it could be a cue of life threat or danger for the client's autonomic nervous system, and they may experience, for example, a fawn response. If an individual works in a workplace that runs at high speed and doesn't allow people to say no, this could be a cue of danger for the individual's nervous system. If they think that they will never find another job at a different place or they are afraid to lose their job, it may also be a cue of life threat for the individual autonomic nervous system dependent on their economic situation. So as these examples explain, our responses to the environment and our environment may really influence our autonomic nervous system. Overall, our nervous systems are shaped by our experiences. Therefore, each of us has different cues of safety, danger, and life threat. As a result, we need to be curious about our experiences and explore the cues that are relevant for our lives. Ideally, our autonomic nervous system flows through these stages fluently and returns to safety and connection when the threat is over. However, it may look differently if we have experienced trauma, and I'll explain that later. Overall, befriending our autonomic nervous system and making the unconscious processes conscious is a big part of trauma recovery. Let's look at the second core principle of polyvagal theory, hierarchy. So in the contrast to the window of tolerance, polyvagal theory describes a hierarchy of responses, often visualized as a ladder. The top of the ladder corresponds to ventral vagus activation, the system of safety and connection. The middle is the system of mobilization or the fight or flight response. And the bottom is immobilization or dorsal vagus shutdown. So let's look a bit more at the top of the ladder, ventral vagus activation. And it is a system of safety and connection. When we are in this state, we can restore and we can grow. We can also regulate, whether it's on individual level or whether it is interactively with others. And so in general, when we are in ventral vagus activation, it is a system of social engagement. And we feel connected to ourselves and we feel connected with the world around us. At the middle of the ladder, it's a system of mobilization. So if a cue of danger is detected, the autonomic nervous system activates the fight and flight response. So we are now in the middle of the ladder. So at this state, we protect ourselves through action, aggression, or active escape. At the bottom of the ladder, we have immobilization or dorsal vagus activation. So if a cue of life threat is perceived, the system of immobilization gets activated, also known as the freeze or fawn response. This means we protect ourselves by conserving our energy, shutting down, or dissociating. So here's a quick example. Imagine starting at the state of safety and connection, ventral vagus activation. Suddenly, the nervous system detects a cue of danger and mobilizes the fight and flight response. However, the danger increases rapidly and becomes a cue of life threat. So the autonomic nervous system now moves into a state of immobilization or dorsal vagus activation. And so when the threat is over, the system automatically returns to safety, and it usually moves back through the same stages, but now it goes the ladder up. So we go from immobilization to mobilization and then back to safety and connection. So please note that each nervous system is shaped differently. Some people, myself included, go very quickly into the immobilized state, while other people may stay very long in the fight and flight state. So we are all different, and so also our responses will be different. So here's one of my insights about polyvagal theory. When I first experimented with the theory, I created my own polyvagal map based on the workshop by Deb Dana. And understanding that the state of my nervous system really influences how I perceive the world has really been transformative for me. So, for example, the world may seem really dark and disconnected when I'm in a fawn response, whereas it appears full of opportunities in ventral vagus activation. Therefore, the story I create about the world, my life, and myself is very different, dependent on the state I'm in. This awareness really helped me to recognize that if I change state, it also changes my complete emotional experience and the story that I tell myself about life. And so it also helped me recognize that sometimes the story I have may not necessarily be a story that is true. And in session with my clients, I often guide clients through a similar awareness exercise so that they can explore how the different states feel in their body, and also that they understand the beliefs they have about themselves and the world depending on the state they're in. So the exercise allows my clients to really experience how it is to move from a state of immobilization through the system of mobilization into the system of safety and connection. Clients often discover a new sense of control over their nervous system. Many clients share a similar insight to those that I have experienced and really see the connection between the physiological state and how they see the world and how they see themselves. Co-regulation is the third principle of polyvagal theory. It describes how interactions with others shape and regulate our autonomic nervous system. Essentially, our nervous system constantly sends and receives cues of safety or danger, which profoundly can influence our relationships. When cues of dangers are present, there are two primary responses. The first one is reactivity. So we have a cue of danger and two people are present, and we start to intensify habitual survival patterns, and the conflict is escalating. For example, in a couple's argument, if one partner responds with a freeze response, while the other partner reacts with a fight response, and they do not recognize or manage their states, their reactivity can easily escalate and really reinforce their survival patterns and also heighten the tension. The other option we have in face of conflict and dysregulation is co-regulating. So this involves the ability to regulate ourselves and each other, and therefore fostering safety and creating new possibilities. Just imagine the same example, both partners become aware of their states and use practices to co-regulate and to self-regulate. And in this moment, they can transform their interaction and they can build new possibilities and also create a healthier relationship. So co-regulation is a crucial element in the therapeutic context. When a client experiences states of mobilization or immobilization, the counselor must be able to be attuned to their autonomic state and really engage in co-regulation to support the client to move through their states. So this mutual regulation supports the client in developing their self-regulating skills and also enhances a therapeutic relationship. So now let's briefly look at what is the difference between polyvagal theory and the window of tolerance. So before I jump into explaining more about polyvagal theory and trauma, let's look at the differences between polyvagal theory and the concept of the window of tolerance, which I explained in an earlier episode. I'll drop a link in the description. So while there are parallels between both theories, in the different states of responses and what they mean, there are also differences. Polyvagal theory focuses on the role of the vagus nerve in regulating physiological responses and emotional states. Furthermore, it looks at the interdependencies between cues of safety and danger and our responses. Therefore, it explores really the interconnectedness between a physiological response and specific triggers that might happen inside of our bodies, in the relationships, and in the environment. So it really helps us to understand better the context in which we may experience certain symptoms. The concept of the window of tolerance speaks about the states. However, it focuses more on how an individual can effectively manage and process intense emotion. So it doesn't necessarily look at the cues of safety or danger. It really describes how an individual can have a zone of tolerance where they can effectively manage intense emotions without feeling overwhelmed or without shutting down. So the window of tolerance represents our capacity to handle stress without looking at the context of what has activated our response. Here's an example how these concepts could correlate. For example, a client experienced a fawn response during a session, and they recognized their response, and we used a grounding exercise to get them back into the window of tolerance. This is an example of how to apply the window of tolerance. When they were back in the window of tolerance, we explored which signs of danger activated the nervous system. So we discovered that the action of me asking questions was a cue of danger for their nervous system and activated the immobilization response, which is part of polyvagal theory. So the act of asking questions, while it is very natural in counseling, is also an act of power. And so depending on what has happened to the individual, it may really activate their autonomic nervous system. And so due to the inherent power imbalance in the therapeutic relationship, it can also have a more profound impact. And so when we explored the cues of danger and gained the new insight, I adjusted my approach in the way how I ask questions so that the client could go through the sessions without having a fawn response. And also when the client went through their own experience, I focus on staying connected to my state of safety and connection so that my autonomic nervous system could offer the client a sense of co-regulation. And so this is an example of how to apply polyvagal theory in counseling. So now let's look on how polyvagal theory explains trauma. To be clear, even if we don't have experienced trauma, we cannot always be in state of safety and connection. So it's really natural to go up and down the ladder when there is a cue of danger. However, ideally, we flow back into this state of safety and connection after the threat is over. However, if we experience trauma, it can really interrupt the balance and the natural flow between the different states. So this means that the autonomic nervous system can get stuck in a response mode, whether it's a system of mobilization or the system of immobilization. And so even though the actual threat is gone, the body perceives danger. Therefore, the response modes of mobilization or immobilization stay engaged. And so as a result, the individual may experience a chronic fight or flight response or a chronic shutdown, or they may switch frequently between sympathetic arousal and dorsal vagus activation. However, they hardly ever go into a state of safety at the top of the ladder. And so for many people who have experienced childhood trauma, the state of safety and connection may seem out of reach. Due to my own childhood trauma, I only experienced a state of safety and connection as a young adult when I was alone with animals or in nature, because relationship inherently didn't feel safe. And so some of my clients hardly remember if they ever experienced safety and connection. And sometimes we really need to look for those very small moments when somebody had a state of safety and connection. And so in general, in trauma counseling, an essential goal is to find practices to connect the individual with a state of safety and connection over time. So this is an inner process that requires patience and persistence. Just also be aware other dynamics that may provoke a state of mobilization or immobilization are connected with our internal dialogues and the part that hold wounds of trauma. As I explained before, there is a risk that we experience inner fragmentation after trauma. And if some of these intense parts take over, it can dysregulate our nervous system. So this can be connected to self-blaming parts, parts with self-hatred, or parts that have punitive voices. And since I discussed the theory of structural dissociations in my last episode, the previous example also explained how the two theories can connect. Common parts associated with structural dissociations are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn parts. Depending on what happens to us, I find it just beneficial to integrate polyvagal theory into parts work therapy as an additional framework to explain trauma responses. Our lived experience is often far more complex than one version of one theory can explain. So, for example, when we look at parts work, some people may experience a part in a fawn response, and at the same time, there's a part in a fight response. Or some people may experience a part that is in a flight response, but still have a certain percentage of connection with the state of safety and connection. So overall, in our lived experience, it's really about creating awareness, what is happening inside of us, which parts are active. And like sometimes polyvagal theory in itself is a very simplified version of what inner states we may experience. So cues of danger and life threat for our nervous system can vary and depend from person to person. Furthermore, each nervous system is shaped differently. So curiosity to get to know our nervous system is essential for the healing process. Please note that these responses don't mean you're broken or something is wrong with you. They are adaptive coping mechanisms that allowed you to survive extreme circumstances. And we can reshape our autonomic nervous system with patience and persistence in our recovery journey. And so this journey is individually different. And so it's hard to predict, and we all will have a different timeline in that. Let's look at the role of polyvagal theory in trauma recovery. As with any theory, polyvagal theory can help us better understand how trauma affects our autonomic nervous system and make sense of complex inner processes. However, the critical part is to find practices to apply the theory to one's life, since the theory alone won't change the symptoms. In work with my clients, polyvagal theory serves as one cornerstone of many different treatment modalities, alongside with EMDR, parts work therapy, and other trauma-informed practices. So it is an integrated approach. Here are some of the benefits that polyvagal theory can give us. First of all, polyvagal theory can support us to reestablish safety and connection. The first stage of trauma recovery is safety and stabilization. Polyvagal theory can help us recognize if we are stuck in a state of mobilization or fight and flight, or immobilization and shutdown. As I said before, I usually guide my clients through a process so that they can create awareness of how the different states feel in their body. This allows them to recognize them later on more quickly. Additionally, we use various practices to bring the client back to a place of safety and connection. The second benefit is that we can use polyvagal theory in the therapeutic relationship to really implement co-regulation. Co-regulation, one of the core principles of polyvagal theory, explains that the counselor plays an active role in the healing process. They need to be attuned to their autonomic nervous system to be able to co-regulate with the client if their nervous system dysregulates. The therapist's calm and grounded presence can model and support the client's journey towards self-regulation, helping them to feel more connected and also to regulate more easily when processing difficult emotions or memory. This co-regulation can be a powerful tool in rebuilding the client's capacity to trust and connect with others. Please note that counselors are imperfect and may sometimes become dysregulated. When this happens, it is the counselor's responsibility to regulate themselves, offer an apology, and make a repair bid with the clients. Additionally, polyvagal theory also offers a more personalized trauma treatment. The framework of polyvagal theory helps us understand how different individuals' responses to trauma are based on their autonomic nervous system's unique shaping. Therefore, it allows us to use a more personalized approach and really explore the unique cues of safety and danger an individual may experience. And by tailoring the intervention to the individual's nervous system, the counselor can help the client to really build resilience and gradually expand the window of tolerance over time, And this allows them to better manage stress and also become more emotionally regulated. Please remember that it's a common misconception that healing means that we are always in a state of safety and connection. This is really impossible. Healing comes in stages, and even if you are fully healed, our autonomic nervous system cannot always be in safety and connection. And I'm really emphasizing this because I've noticed that some clients really tend to self-blame them a lot if they are not always in safety and connection. However, that is an impossible goal to achieve. So the ideal outcome is for our autonomic nervous system that it returns to the top of the ladder, the state of safety and connection, once the threat has passed. And so ideally healing means that we are really go through the different stages very fluently. However, since healing is a process and improvement happens over time, it can really be useful to break this goal down into smaller, more realistic goals. So this can have many different shapes and forms. So it can be, for example, experience a state of safety and connection 10% more often. Or if an individual's autonomic nervous system tends to go into a fight or flight mode and tends to get stuck there for about 6 weeks, it can be the goal to reduce this period to, for example, 5 weeks. So the goals need to be realistic and really be adjusted to the client's situation. So after all this theory, now here are some practical steps on how to apply polyvagal theory to your life. The first step, really start practicing curiosity about your autonomic nervous system and its states. Deb Dana beautifully describes it as befriending your nervous system. So how can you do it? Keep a journal about your day and explore what state your nervous system was in at different times. When did you go into sympathetic activation or fight or flight? When did you experience immobilization? When did you feel a sense of safety and connection? As you identify these moments, explore the cues of danger and safety that activated the different states in your autonomic nervous system. So when you have explored these cues of danger and safety, you can explore what strategies can you use in the future to either soothe your nervous system and go back to safety and connection, or to maybe do something different, like setting more boundaries, expressing, standing up for yourself. It really depends on the context, what strategies you can apply. Create a list of your ventral anchors. Ventral anchors are tools that help you to return and maintain a state of safety and connection. And so, for example, if you have a sense that you hardly ever experience a state of safety and connection, it can be useful to just apply these types of tools throughout the days for a couple of minutes so that you practice them. Just be aware each time you practice them, you create also new pathways in your brain and you start reshaping your autonomic nervous system. So here are some examples on how you can find ventral anchors. So please choose those that resonate and leave the rest. The first example how you can find a ventral anchors is that you find memories that bring you back to a state of safety and connection. So really reflect on a memory when you felt safe and connected. And then you can start visualizing it. So really close your eyes and recall the memory with all of your senses and embody the experience in your body. If it's helpful for you, start writing it down in all the details. So when was the memory? Where did it happen? Who were you with? What were you doing? And how did you feel? And so this can really allow you to deepen the connection with the memory. And so then practice embodying this memory twice a day and observe the shift in your autonomic nervous system. The next step is that you find activities that bring you back to a state of safety and connection. So certain activities can help you to return to a place of safety and connection. And these activities really vary for everybody. So choose something that resonates with you. And if you can find some, really start exploring new activities and see how your nervous system responds to them. So I give you some example. For some people, it can be walking in nature. For some people, it can be sitting in a coffee shop and enjoy a coffee. For some people, it can be cooking or working with their plants. So for my own life, I love to dance. And if I dance regularly, it really helps me to regulate my autonomic nervous system and get out of freeze responses more quickly. Another activity I love to do is going to the zoo because it immediately brings me back into a state of safety and connection. So really consider what activities give you the space and think about how can you incorporate them more often into your life. Another ventral anchor can be people. So really think about what people or pets or animals can give you a state of safety and connection. And I'm aware that for some people, it's easy to identify people who provide safety and connection. And for others, relationships with people may not feel safe. So if this idea doesn't resonate with you, just skip it. That's okay. For those of you who can identify people who give them a state of safety and connection, really write down a list and consider how you could reach out to them or connect with them when you feel dysregulated. Just to give you an example, which is a ventral anchor for me, when I lived in Barcelona, I participated in a training group. And in this group, I did a lot of my own healing. And they have become a vital ventral anchor for me, even though I'm not part of the group anymore. And while I cannot connect with them physically, I just visualize their presence and I really visualize the energy they would send me. And they just used to remind me that I should breathe. And so I just visualize being back there, and it really helps me to go back to a place of safety and connection. And for some people, it can also be pets or animals that really can serve as powerful ventral anchors. Last but not least, we come back to grounding exercise, which can really help us to return to a place of safety and connection, especially when emotions are heightened. So if you feel overwhelmed, try the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding exercise. How can you do this? Answer these 5 questions. So name out loud 5 things you can see. Name out 4 things you can feel. Name out 3 things you can hear. Name out 2 things you can smell. And name 1 thing you can taste. Another powerful tool to ground yourself is to connect to your breath and really start to do mindful breathing exercises. And if you want to find more tools, please check out the episode about the window of tolerance, and I will put in the link in the description. Understanding and applying polyvagal theory can be a very powerful tool in your trauma recovery journey. It can help you recognize and navigate the states of your autonomic nervous system in a better way, in a healthier way. Integrating these practical techniques into your daily life allows you to gradually cultivate a greater sense of safety and connection, even amidst the challenges that life may throw onto you. Really remember that healing is a process, and with patience and persistence, you can reshape your nervous system to support your ongoing growth and resilience. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode. If you have enjoyed the content and found it helpful, please consider subscribing the podcast to stay up to date for future episodes. Your support helps us continue to share valuable insights and resources on the journey of healing and recovery. I hope to connect with you soon. Take care.